The rain tapped lightly on the cab window as Maria clutched her worn handbag, her eyes fixed on the towering stone mansion at the end of the tree-lined drive. She hadn't stepped inside a place like that since she was 9 years old, the day her mother had been dismissed from a similar estate for accidentally spilling wine on a senator's shoes. That day had left a quiet scar, one she rarely acknowledged but never forgot. And yet, here she was again, standing in front of wealth and power, not as a child hiding behind her mother's legs, but as a grown woman searching for hope. Maria took a deep breath and stepped out into the drizzle. Her shoes, borrowed and slightly too big, slipped on the wet cobblestone. She straightened her back and adjusted her simple coat. There was no room for hesitation now. She needed this job not for status or pride, but for survival. Her father had passed 2 winters ago, leaving behind debts that ate away at her mother's meager wages. Maria had left school to help, working cleaning jobs during the day and assisting at a corner bakery by night. Still, it had never been enough. But this opportunity, this one glimmering, intimidating offer, might finally make a difference. A tall woman in a pressed navy dress opened the front door. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice was gentle. "You must be Miss Alvarez. He's expecting you." Maria nodded, swallowing the nerves tightening her throat. "Yes, ma'am." She followed the woman through a wide hallway lined with dark wood and fading oil portraits. The silence in the house was thick, not empty, but heavy like a place, holding its breath. They reached a large study where the curtains were drawn, but a fireplace glowed with soft amber light. The woman tapped gently on the doorframe. "Mr. Thorne, Miss Maria Alvarez is here." There was a pause. "Send her in," came the voice from within, low, gravelly, with an edge of fatigue that seemed to echo from someplace deeper than the throat. Maria stepped inside, and was immediately met with the sight of a man not nearly as old as she expected. Mr. Lucas Thorne, billionaire, philanthropist, media-shy, recluse-wise only in his mid-40s, but illness had hollowed his cheeks and paled his skin. He sat in a high-backed chair near the fire, a wool blanket over his knees, and an oxygen tank humming softly beside him. His eyes, those were sharp, watching her. "Measuring you're younger than the others," he said without preamble. "I'm 23, she replied quietly, "but I've been cleaning homes since I was 16, and I take care of my mother." He nodded slowly. "Why do you want this job?" She hesitated. This was the question she had rehearsed for days, but none of the polished answers seemed right anymore. "Because I need it," she said finally, "and because I won't pretend. I'm not here to impress you. I'm here because I'll do the work. I'll be kind, and I won't treat you like a burden. My mother taught me to serve with dignity, not pity." A flicker passed through his face, surprise, maybe even a touch of respect. He leaned forward, just slightly, as though that honesty had stirred something long dormant. "Do you believe in redemption, Maria?" He asked out. The question caught her off guard. Her fingers curled around the strap of her bag. "I think we all deserve a chance to be seen for who we really are, even if it's just once." He exhaled slow, heavy, then looked toward the fire. The flames danced in silence between them. "You'll start tomorrow. The maid's quarters are through the east hall." Maria blinked. "Wait, I'm staying here. I don't want strangers coming in and out of my home. It's safer this way. You'll have your own room. Clean in the morning. Stay through the day. That is, if you're willing." She nodded, even as her heart pounded. "Yes, I am." As she turned to leave, he spoke again so softly she nearly missed it. "Sometimes the night is the loneliest part." She paused at the door, unsure whether to respond. She didn't, but the words stayed with her all the way down the hallway, and long after she lay awake in the small, quiet room meant for someone she never thought she'd become. That night, the storm outside deepened, and inside that mansion, hidden from the noise of the world, 2 strangers lay awake, each carrying stories they weren't yet ready to tell. But the next morning would begin something neither of them expected, something that would change both their lives forever. Maria awoke to the soft sound of rain brushing against the window pane. For a moment, she forgot where she wasn't, till her eyes landed on the carved wooden beams overhead, the crisp linen sheets, and the faint scent of lavender in the air. This wasn't her Brooklyn apartment. It was quieter, heavier somehow. The kind of silence that didn't rest, it waited. She dressed quickly, pulling her hair back into a neat bun and slipping on her plain black shoes. The hallway was still dim when she stepped out, and for a moment she wondered if she was too early. But just as she reached the staircase, she heard the distant echo of piano music, faint, deliberate, beautiful in a sad sort of way. Curious, Maria followed the sound until she reached the doorway of a sunroom at the back of the house. There, seated at an old grand piano, was Mr. Thorne. His posture was upright, hands slow but precise as they moved over the keys. He hadn't noticed her, not yet, and she didn't mean to intrude, but there was something fragile about the moment, as though she'd stepped into a memory that didn't belong to her. When the music stopped, his fingers rested on the keys a moment longer before he looked up. Their eyes met. "You're up early," he said, without annoyance. "I heard the music," she replied. "It was beautiful." Lucas gave a soft chuckle. "It used to be. I haven't played much in years. Not since—" He stopped, then gestured toward a chair. "Come, sit a moment." She hesitated. "I don't want to overstep." "You're not?" I asked. Maria sat down slowly. The air smelled of old paper and rain. "You remind me of someone," he said. After a pause, "She was kind, like you, quiet strength. She used to sit just where you're sitting now." Maria folded her hands in her lap, unsure what to say. "She was the only person who ever stayed when I had nothing left to offer," he continued. "Most people vanish when your name loses value." She looked at him. "Did she leave too?" "She passed years ago. I never even got to say goodbye." There was something different in his voice now. Not sadness exactly, more like surrender. The kind that comes after you've fought too long and too hard. "I'm sorry," Maria said gently. Lucas nodded once. "Grief, it's strange. It doesn't come all at once. It waits, hides in ordinary moments. Like when you wake up and forget they're gone. Or when you see a face that almost looks like theirs." He turned back to the piano but didn't play. Maria could have stood and gone back to work. That was what she came for. But something rooted her there, as if she understood, more than she let on. "My father died in the winter," she said quietly. "I still hear his footsteps at night. I know it's not real, but sometimes it feels like if I just waited long enough, he'd walk through the door." Lucas glanced at her. Something in his expression softened. "You know more about loss than most people your age." She gave a small, sad smile. "I know it teaches you to listen to what people don't say." A long pause followed. Then, in a voice more fragile than before, Lucas whispered, "I'm scared, Maria." That surprised her. "Of what?" "Not dying," he said. "Being forgotten. As if I never mattered." His words hung in the air, and Maria felt their weight in her chest. She'd seen men with wealth, power, pride, but never like this. Never someone so openly afraid of being invisible. "You matter," she said softly. "You matter because you're still here, and someone is listening." Lucas stared at her for a long moment. Then, with a quiet breath, he looked away. Later that day, Maria cleaned the upper study while Lucas rested. The house was filled with little clues of a life once lived, fully dusty photos, half-finished books, awards, tucked away like they no longer mattered. And as she wiped down the glass shelf above the fireplace, her hand brushed against a framed picture. A woman mid-30s, laughing, radiant, stood beside Lucas on a sunlit balcony. She was the woman from the piano room, the one he'd lost. Maria placed it back gently, careful not to disturb the moment frozen in time. That evening, after dinner, Lucas asked her to sit again. No piano this time, just quiet conversation. He asked her about her mother, her dreams, if she ever wanted to travel. Maria laughed softly. "I don't know. I've never even left New York." "Then maybe you should," he said. "Life's too short to stay in the same chapter." She smiled. "Only if you keep turning the pages." Lucas chuckled, a warm, quiet sound that seemed to surprise even him. The sun dipped behind the trees outside, as the two of them talked about nothing and everything. And when the silence came, it wasn't awkward anymore. It was safe. But that night, something changed. Just after midnight, Maria was awakened by the soft knock at her door. When she opened it, Lucas stood there, weak, pale, holding the edge of the hallway table for support. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I know this is strange, but the night feels endless sometimes. I didn't want to be alone." Maria didn't speak. She just stepped aside and let him in. He didn't ask for more than that. He sat on the chair by her window while she brought him a blanket. They didn't talk much. He looked out at the sky and she sat nearby, keeping quiet company. When he finally drifted off, she stayed awake, watching him sleep. His face, usually burdened, now looked peaceful, lighter dot, and for the first time since she stepped into that house, Maria understood. He hadn't asked her to stay because he was rich, or dying, or lonely. He asked because, deep down, everyone, no matter how powerful or broken, wants to feel seen, wanted, human. And as the night faded into morning, Maria knew this story wasn't about saving him. It was about what they were beginning to save in each other. ChatGPT said. The morning light crept softly through the curtains as Maria stirred from the chair she had eventually curled into. Lucas was still asleep, his head tilted slightly toward the window, the blanket slipping from his shoulder. For a man constantly surrounded by silence, he looked strangely at peace. Maria didn't move for a moment. She simply watched. There was something tender, even sacred, about the way he had come to her door in the night, not with entitlement, but with quiet, wordless need. She rose gently, folded the blanket, and stepped into the hallway without waking him. As she walked past the grand paintings and shelves of books, she noticed how different the house felt, less like a museum, more like a place waiting to be lived in again. Downstairs, Mrs. Raymond, the longtime housekeeper, was already setting out tea. "You were up late," she said, not unkindly. Maria hesitated, unsure if she was being accused or understood. "He couldn't sleep." Mrs. Raymond gave a quiet nod. "He rarely does. Some nights are harder than others." "Has he always been like this?" Maria asked. Mrs. Raymond paused before answering. "He wasn't always this fragile. Years ago, Mr. Thorne was full of life, difficult, yes, but magnetic. People listened when he entered a room. There was a time he wouldn't spend 5 minutes alone. Now he counts the minutes someone stays." Maria glanced back toward the staircase, her heart already turning. When Lucas woke, he found her in the library, dusting the bookshelves. She looked up, unsure what to expect, whether he'd pretend the night before never happened. But instead, he gave a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," he said simply. And from that moment, something shifted. Their days grew fuller. Maria learned to read his rhythms when he wanted to speak and when he just needed someone near. She brought him herbal tea in the afternoons, helped him sort through old boxes of forgotten letters and photos. Some days he shared stories about his travels, his failed investments, his estranged younger brother who hadn't spoken to him in years. Other days, he said nothing at all. But the silence between them had changed. It was no longer empty. It was full of quiet understanding. One rainy afternoon, Lucas asked Maria to accompany him to the garden. He hadn't been outside in weeks, but insisted he needed air. She helped him into a wool coat and guided him carefully down the stone steps. The garden was overgrown, but still beautiful wildflowers poking through between the hedges, the last of the autumn leaves crunching underfoot. Lucas walked slowly, leaning on a cane. But there was something in his eyes, something alive. "She used to love this place," he murmured. "Anna. She'd sit right there under that tree with a book and forget the world existed." Maria followed his gaze to the old iron bench, now half covered in moss. "She sounds like she made this place feel like home." "She did," he said. "And when she left, the house never forgave me for it." Maria turned to him. "Did she leave, or did something happen?" Lucas's jaw tightened. "I pushed her away. I was too proud to admit I needed her. By the time I tried to fix it, cancer had already taken her." Maria felt a familiar ache stir in her chest. Regret was its own kind of illness. It didn't show on the skin, but it slowly wore people down from the inside out. "She would have stayed," Lucas added quietly, "if I had just asked." Maria looked at him, seeing not just a man with wealth or power, but a man buried beneath years of grief and guilt. She wanted to say something, but he suddenly stopped walking and looked straight at her. "Maria, why do you stay?" The question hung in the air, not heavy, but raw. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked up at the gray sky, breathing in the cold air. "Because I think everyone deserves someone who doesn't walk away." Lucas didn't respond, but his hand cold reached out just enough to brush hers, and she didn't pull away. That evening, after dinner, Lucas asked her if she believed people could change. "I think people don't change because no one ever expects them to," Maria replied. "But sometimes all it takes is one person believing they can." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded slowly. "You make the silence less unbearable, Maria." Later, while clearing the table, Mrs. Raymond gave Maria a knowing glance. "He hasn't spoken this much in months." Maria didn't know what to say. She wasn't trying to be anything more than present. but maybe that was what he needed most. That night, around midnight, the knock came again. When she opened the door, Lucas stood there once more, pale but steady. Just for a little while, he asked softly. Maria nodded and stepped aside. He didn't need entertainment or distractions. He needed something most people had forgotten how to give: time, patience, presence. They sat near the window again. This time, Lucas brought a photograph. It was him and Anna, smiling, seated on that same bench in the garden. I keep wondering, he said, voice barely audible, if she ever forgave me. I think, Maria whispered, she'd be proud you're trying. Lucas closed his eyes and let out a breath that sounded like a weight leaving his chest. And for the first time since Maria arrived, she saw something in his face that hadn't been there before. Hope. It was faint, flickering, fragile, but it was there. Asterisk. Maria had never thought silence could feel so loud. She sat alone in the study, dust motes dancing in the slant of afternoon light, her hands still resting on the untouched book in her lap. It had been over an hour since Lucas had returned from his appointment, and the tension in the air hadn't settled. When the driver brought him home from the hospital, he had barely spoken. His face, usually calm in its resignation, had looked different to date, troubled, haunted. Something had changed. She could feel it. Earlier that morning, before he left, Lucas had held her gaze longer than usual, as if memorizing her. When she asked if he was all right, he gave her a smile too hollow to believe, and simply said, "We all run out of time eventually, don't we?" And now, the weight of that sentence was pressing down on her like a storm that hadn't yet broken. The grandfather clock chimed softly in the hallway. Maria closed the book and stood, drawn by something she couldn't name. She moved through the corridors until she found herself outside Lucas's door. She raised her hand to knock, then paused. From inside, she heard nothing. Just as she was about to turn away, the door opened. Lucas stood there, pale as parchment, one hand on the doorframe, the other gripping a medical envelope. He looked at her for a long moment before stepping aside. "Come in," he said, voice low. She followed him into the dimly lit room. The curtains were drawn, and a fire burned gently in the hearth. The envelope sat on the table beside his chair. He didn't speak right away, just lowered himself into the seat and stared at the flames. "They told me the treatments aren't working," he said quietly. "The cancer's spread." Maria's breath caught. "They gave me 2 months, 3 if I'm lucky." Her throat tightened. I'm so sorry, Mr. Thorne." He gave a soft, bitter laugh. "Lucas, please. I think we're far past formalities now." She nodded, though her chest ached. "I've had time to prepare for this," he continued. "Years, really. But somehow, hearing it out loud makes it feel more real. Final." Maria knelt beside his chair. "You don't have to go through this alone." He looked at her with tired eyes. "That's the thing, Maria. I've already spent so much of my life alone, and when I die, I'll leave behind a legacy no one cares to remember. A name with money, but no meaning." She shook her head. "That's not true. You've touched lives, mine included. You've shared stories, opened your home, let someone in." He reached over and took her hand, and this time it trembled. "I don't want to die in this house, surrounded by regrets," he said. "I want to feel human again, just once more." Maria didn't respond right away. The fire crackled gently beside them. She thought of all the nights he had come to her door not to demand, but to ask, to be seen, to be comforted in the only way he knew how. "Then let's make these days count," she whispered. That evening, Maria took him outside again, even though the air was colder than before. She wrapped him in scarves, helped him into his coat, and pushed his wheelchair down to the garden. They sat under the old tree Anna had loved so much. Lucas closed his eyes and breathed deeply. "I used to believe life was about building things, towers, wealth, walls. And now," she asked softly, "I think it's about moments," he said, "and who we share them with." Maria smiled. "Then you're still building, just differently now." For the next hour, they didn't speak much. They just listened to the wind, to the distant hum of the city, to the small rhythms of life still pulsing around them. And when they returned to the house, Lucas asked her almost shyly if she would stay in the room a while, like before, not out of fear this time, but because, in his words, the night feels less like the end when you're near. Maria nodded and helped him settle into bed. She pulled up a chair beside him, her presence steady and warm. They talked about dreams, ones they had let go of, and ones still waiting quietly to be remembered. Lucas told her about a cabin he had once bought in the mountains but never visited. I always said I'd go when I had time. I guess I didn't understand what time really meant. Maria smiled gently. You still have time. Maybe not to visit the cabin, but to say the words you never said. To forgive. To let someone forgive you. Lucas turned to her, eyes glassy with emotion. Do you forgive me? She blinked, startled. For what? For all the years I wasted, for the way I treated people, for letting bitterness turn me into someone I'm not proud of. Maria reached out and took his hand again. I think the person sitting here right now is worth forgiving, and I believe you're trying. That's what matters. He looked at her, really looked at her. You're more than just a maid, Maria. She smiled. And you're more than just a name. The clock ticked quietly in the background. The fire dimmed dot, and there, in that moment, Lucas Thorne wasn't a dying millionaire. He was just a man learning how to live again. And Maria wasn't just a maid. She was the reason he still believed it wasn't too late. The knock on the front door came just after noon. Unexpected and sharp, breaking the stillness that had settled over the Thorne estate like a warm blanket. Maria was in the kitchen, preparing tea for Lucas, when she heard Mrs. Raymond's heels click across the marble floor, toward the entrance. Moments later, voices muffled, unfamiliar, and then, a name spoken low but firm, his brother. Maria froze. Lucas had mentioned him only once in passing, with the kind of hurt that doesn't fade with time. He walked away, Lucas had said then, without bitterness, but with something heavier, silence, curious and cautious. Maria moved closer, to the entrance hall, wiping her hands on a dish towel. From the edge of the corridor, she saw him tall, sharp-suited, with a striking resemblance to Lucas, though where Lucas had grown weary, this man wore his confidence like armor. His voice was even polite, but clipped. I got the letter. Lucas stood across from him, leaning lightly on his cane, shoulders straighter than usual. Didn't expect you to come. The man shrugged. I almost didn't. Maria stayed back, unseen. She didn't want to intrude, but something about the air between them felt electric, like a wound reopened, just enough to let the truth escape. I didn't send the letter to guilt you, Lucas said. I just thought maybe you should know. The brother looked at him, eyes narrowing. Know that you're dying, or know that you finally remembered you had a family. Lucas didn't flinch. Both, maybe. There was a pause, heavy, charged. I'm not here to argue, the brother finally said, or to fix anything. Good, Lucas said, his voice lower now, because I'm not asking you to. Maria stepped away then, quietly returning to the kitchen, giving them the space they clearly hadn't had in years. But even as she stirred the tea, her hands trembled slightly. Something was unraveling, or beginning, when she brought Lucas his tea later. He was sitting alone in the library, the fire crackling low, eyes glassy with thought. Thank you, he murmured, taking the cup gently. She hesitated, then asked, Are you all right? He nodded, then shook his head. He was angry, rightfully so. I pushed everyone away when Anna died. I didn't want anyone to see me fall apart, least of all him. Maria sat beside him, quiet, letting him speak. I think I've spent so many years hiding behind who I used to be. I forgot how to just be. He looked at her. But you've made it easier. She gave him a small smile. You make it easier too. Later that night, Lucas surprised her. As they sat in the parlor, he turned to her with a spark she hadn't seen before. Maria, he said softly, there's something I'd like to do before it's too late. She tilted her head. What is it? I want to go back. To the cabin I told you about. Just once. I want to see the place I was saving for someday. I don't want to die wondering what it looked like in the fall. Maria's breath caught. Are you sure? I've never been more sure. They spent the next 2 days preparing quietly, carefully. Mrs. Raymond made arrangements with a doctor in the town near the cabin. A nurse was called to check Lucas's vitals and clear him for travel. Maria packed his medications, extra blankets, his favorite scarf. The morning they left, the city was draped in fog. Maria sat beside Lucas in the back seat as the driver wound through long curving roads that led them far from everything familiar. They arrived by late afternoon. The cabin was tucked into a slope of pine and maple trees, their leaves ablaze with gold and amber. A small lake shimmered nearby, catching the last of the sun. The air smelled of wood smoke and something else, freedom maybe, or peace. Lucas stepped out slowly, leaning on Maria's arm. His eyes scanned the landscape, and for a long moment, he said nothing. Then, softly, "It's more beautiful than I imagined." Inside the cabin was simple but warm. A stone fireplace, wooden beams, a rocking chair by the window that looked out at the lake. Maria helped him settle into a chair by the fire as she unpacked. "I always thought I'd come here with Anna," he said, voice tinged with memory. "I had this vision of us reading, by the fire, maybe snow falling outside, laughing about nothing." Maria sat beside him on the rug. "She'd be glad you came. I wish she could see it," he said. "You're seeing it for both of you now." He turned to her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he reached out, gently brushing a lock of hair from her face. "You remind me of her in all the best ways." Maria felt her heart stir, not with confusion or hesitation, but something tender, a recognition of how far they'd come, of how much one quiet presence could mean to someone who had once been surrounded by noise, yet starved for meaning. That night, Maria lit a fire and made them tea. Lucas asked if she would sit with him until he fell asleep. As she tucked the blanket around him and pulled the chair close, he looked up at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not afraid tonight." She smiled gently. "That's because you're not alone." Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and inside, a man who had once feared dying unseen was finally beginning to understand what it meant to be remembered for something more than wealth. He was being remembered because he was finally being known. The snow arrived earlier than expected. Maria stood at the cabin window, watching as soft white flakes drifted gently through the morning air, blanketing the forest in a quiet hush. The lake had begun to freeze at its edges, forming a glassy rim that caught the light like crystal. Inside, the fire still crackled, warm and steady. Lucas was still asleep, his chest rising and falling beneath the thick quilt, his face more peaceful than she'd ever seen it. Something about the snow made everything feel suspended in time, like the world outside had slowed down just long enough to let him rest without fear. But Maria knew time hadn't stopped. It was just giving them one final gift. She turned away from the window, moving quietly to prepare breakfast, though she knew Lucas would eat very little now. His appetite had dwindled in the past 2 days, and his strength was fading faster than either of them had prepared for. Still, he insisted on waking up, insisted on seeing the lake, insisted on hearing the stories she read aloud each night. The day before, he had asked her to bring out the old leather journal he kept in his bag. She hadn't known it existed until then. The pages were filled with letters, mailed, unfinished, raw pieces of memory and regret. Letters to Anna, to his brother, to himself. He had asked Maria to read a few aloud, and when she hesitated, not wanting to intrude on something so personal, he reached over and gently placed her hand on the cover. "I wrote them for someone to read one day," he said. "You're the one I trust to do it." So she read. She read about the day he met Anna in a crowded gallery, about the first time she made him laugh so hard he forgot who he was trying to impress. She read about the quiet nights after she got sick, how he prayed with his forehead against the floor, just for one more day with her. And she read the letter he had written the day Anna died. It ended with 4 words that had stopped Maria cold. "I never said goodbye." That night, Maria didn't leave his side, not when the fire dimmed, not when the wind howled against the cabin's walls. She stayed in the chair beside his bed, her hand resting in his, her eyes drifting closed only when his breathing steadied into sleep. Now, in the soft light of the snowy morning, he stirred. "Maria," his voice was barely a whisper. She moved to his side instantly. "I'm here." He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze gentle, as though trying to memorize her. "Will you sit with me a little longer?" "Always," she said, sitting beside him, her hand finding his. He smiled faintly. "Do you know what you gave me?" She shook her head, her throat too tight to speak. "You gave me back my name," he whispered. "Not the one on buildings or checks. The one I thought I lost when I stopped being someone worth remembering." Maria felt tears blur her vision, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. She wanted this moment to remain clear, not clouded by sadness. "You've always been worth remembering," she said softly. "You just needed someone to remind you." His fingers closed lightly around hers. "I wrote one more letter," he said after a moment. "It's in the journal. For you." Maria hesitated. "Should I read it now?" He shook his head. "Later, when it's time." The day passed slowly. Snow continued to fall, blanketing the world outside in stillness. Lucas asked her to read. To him again, not from the journal, but from a book he'd once promised Anna they'd finish together. His eyelids fluttered closed as she read, and though he drifted in and out of sleep, his hand never left hers. That evening, as the sky turned, soft pink with sunset, he opened his eyes once more. "Maria," he said, "I'm here." He looked at her, and for the first time, there was no trace of pain or fear, just peace. "Thank you for staying." She squeezed his hand, tears slipping free now. "You were never alone." And then, with the faintest of smiles, he closed his eyes. The breath left his body as gently as the snow touched the ground. He didn't cry out, didn't fear, he just let go. Maria sat with him for a long time, the silence now sacred, not empty. The kind of silence that wraps itself around love and loss, and all the unspoken things in between. When she finally opened the journal, her fingers trembling, she found the last letter addressed, not to Anna, or his brother, or even to himself. It was to her. "Maria, you gave me more than comfort. You gave me courage. You reminded me of the man I had buried under years of pride and grief. You made me laugh. You made me feel. You made me hope in a life filled with wealth. I never knew what it meant to be rich until I met you. Please, don't forget me, not for what I was, but for what I became in the days I shared with you. Thank you for everything." Lucas. Maria pressed the letter to her heart. He had come to her door, a broken man, not knowing how to ask for help, and he had left this world seen, forgiven, and deeply loved. Months later, Maria stood beneath the same tree in the garden where Lucas had once spoken of Anna. The seasons had changed, but she still returned, sometimes to remember, sometimes to read, sometimes just to sit in the quiet. She had found a strength in herself she never knew she had, and though Lucas was gone, his story lived on, not in headlines or bank accounts, but in a maid's heart, forever changed by the man who had once simply asked her to stay, and she had.